everyone, and welcome to The Hash, your daily beat on crypto and culture. My name is Naomi Brockwell, and on the show today, we have Jen Sanasie, Adam Levine, and Will Foxley. Welcome to the show, guys. We're going to start off by talking about huge news in the crypto space right now. This infrastructure bill, it keeps going. So, Will, I'm going to hand off to you. Tell us what's happening with that.
That's right. Things went from bad to arguably worse last night as a new amendment was pushed forward by two other senators. And then the Biden administration jumped onto that amendment, which added a few clarifications to the initial rules for regulating cryptocurrencies. But then they left out a whole other lot of regulations and rules and basically have created just this maelstrom in Capitol Hill where we have lobbyists fighting against each other right now. Unfortunately, there seems to be indications that Janet Yellen, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, is behind the push to this new amendment, which only outlines proof of work mining as okay and does not outline proof of stake systems as being okay. And so essentially, all these other systems are going to have to register with one of the ABC organizations on Capitol Hill and figure out how to be monitored for moving money around the world. Of course, as we know, and we talk on this show often, it's pretty difficult to do that. So we had a few comments. Jerry Brito posted a few tweets last night talking about the new amendment, which came forward from Senator Warner and Senator Portman, which both Republican and Democrat. So they have a bipartisan push for this amendment, and it looks like it could easily pass just because it's bipartisan and people want to get this infrastructure bill pushed. And then we had another tweet from Eric Voorhees talking about how this seems to be a play against DeFi, decentralized finance. And we saw in 2017, there was a lot of pushes against ICOs, which was kind of the peak product for the 2017 bull market. Well, 2020, 2021, we have decentralized finance, which is arguably a much more mature product. And now Washington wants its pound of flesh and is going against DeFi. So interesting to see Capitol Hill getting into the technology play, choosing winners and losers, proof of work versus proof of stake, and opting for proof of work. And this also comes oddly after a lot of comments from politicians against proof of work for its ESG narrative. But Naomi, I want to throw it right back to you and then also hear Adam's thoughts from maybe like a historical perspective on regulation.
Yeah, I mean, this is a disaster. The new amendment that's been pushed through at the last minute, it's not a compromise at all. It actually makes the original provision worse because it specifies exactly what they're covering, whereas before they kind of had this vague umbrella term and no one really quite had narrowed down the definition of what a broker was. And so it's interesting that you have this competitive, amendment put through by Wyden, Toomey, Lummis. It looked great. It's getting a lot of support. And even the original creator who wrote the crypto provision in the infrastructure bill was like, yeah, this is good. And then you have, Rob Portman turn around and say, actually, let's have this other amendment. And it makes it so much worse. So this is a disaster for crypto. And you have lots of people in the Twitter space who are saying as much, who are pushing back against this. Charles Hoskinson gave a great live stream last night where he was just saying, listen, I have billions of dollars and I pay all of my taxes currently. Now, if this goes through, it just means that I'm going to be hiring less people in Wyoming. I'm going to be hiring less people in Colorado. They're all going to be offshore. So this isn't going to help you get more money from taxes. This is going to make you lose more jobs and opportunities, and it'll mean less prosperity for people. He has, such a great point because it's exactly what we saw with the BitLicense in New York when they had this draconian rules that were implemented, and everyone left New York. No one complied with this because it was completely overreaching. It was far too difficult to figure out, and so everyone left. Kraken closed its doors. Like everyone just shut shop in New York. And Eric Voorhees had a tweet where he said, as much. He said, listen, we've basically just BitLicensed ourselves out of the entire US market. And so it's not a good situation at all for cryptocurrency. And if this amendment goes through, it is kind of a death knell for a lot of things in the crypto space. But Adam, I'm going to throw to you for your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I'm going to try and keep it pretty quick. I think that the assumption of good faith in this, in terms of our assumption that politicians are acting in good faith, is actually the part that's making it difficult to understand why this is happening. I don't think that is happening. I think that as we've been discussing most of this week while I've been on the show, this is something that they would like to figure out ways to make it more difficult, right? You mentioned that the bit license had a chilling effect in New York and many people left, and that's true, but not everybody left. The existing financial players who are already in power and who already benefit from the system, they were able to get licenses for the most part. And some people were able to work their way through the system, given you had enough money or sway with the departments in order to get that done. And I expect that that's the very same thing here. So the fact that we saw this second bill emerge, or this second amendment emerge, after one that was pretty good for the purpose in terms of actually providing clarity and actually, instituting controls that can be complied with without completely destroying the advantages that are offered by the industry. I think it is very intentional that this came out. And I think it is very intentional that we are seeing a bipartisan push by people who benefit from the way that the current system works to make sure that the rule that gets put in place is one that causes as much damage as possible. So again, I think that so long as we continue to look at these, a lot of people look at politics and they think that there's a partisan problem. It's not a partisan problem. Partisanship actually is not really a thing that I think about much at all anymore. I really think about who is in power and who is advocating for improvements to the system. And you find that that is something that crosses bipartisan on both sides. There are people on both sides of the aisle who will argue for improvements, and there are people on both sides of the aisle who are arguing for the status quo. And that is what we're seeing here, is the status quo is pushing this amendment that we are talking about here that is not good. And the kind of the advocates for the space who have actually, seem to have their goals in the right place in terms of enabling the technology while sustainably regulating it to eliminate as much fraud and danger as possible, have presented something that, again, serves the purpose as they say it does, but that doesn't serve the purpose of the status quo. And so therefore, it's getting a lot of pushback.
Naomi, just off the back of your point, I think about regulators and politicians pushing innovation out of the US, right? But so often in crypto, we see regulators and politicians looking at each other for what to do next. And so if this happens, where do you think these companies are going to go? Or are we going to just kind of end up in a spiral where companies are bouncing from jurisdiction to jurisdiction?
Well, Binance tried that, right? And what happened? You showed that the long arm of the US law reaches far and wide, and it doesn't matter whether you're jurisdictionless, it doesn't matter whether you've set up shop elsewhere. It's technically Seychelles, right? It's same as BitMEX, and yet the US government came in and said, you're based somewhere completely different. You don't allow US customers. Also, we're still going to dictate, the way that you run your business. And they do this. So it doesn't seem like it's a good scenario regardless, even if people do leave the United States, because the US government really is just so powerful when it comes to pressuring other governments around the world what to do. Will, did you have some closing thoughts on this?
Yeah, really quick. So the fight's not over, I would say. I think that discussion could happen in a worst case scenario. It depends not only on if this amendment is changed in the Senate, but if there's amendments passed in the House. And then, of course, this bill wouldn't be implemented till 2023, and you have the entire court system to work through. And then even just regulatory discretion depends on how the IRS interprets some of this legislation that would pass, and if it passes. And then you kind of move on to do these industries move offshore? But certainly a very chilling effect coming on the backside of China cracking down on many different Bitcoin industries, to see the US kind of follow up with that example here.
Mm-hmm. But Will, just on your point, as you said, the fight's not over. The best thing people can be doing is call their representative. I did an interview with Thomas Massey where he said, don't write a letter, don't tweet at them, because they can just ignore that stuff. But you hold up a phone line for 2 minutes, that's huge. So if you call your representative, you let them know that you do not want this new amendment to pass, but you want the Lummis amendment to go through, that would make a huge difference. And this stuff does work. So this will be, you can find links for how to do this in the description. But let's move on. We're going to talk about some other disastrous things happening in the US. This is a fun show today.
All right, it's going to get better. Guys. It's going to get better after this. Just stick with us.
So, Apple, always been the bastion of privacy in the tech space, upholding the values of privacy for all of its consumers and using that as a big basis for its marketing of their products. Now, they intend to install software on American iPhones to scan for child abuse imagery. It sounds like it's very well well-intentioned, right? But this opens the door to surveillance of millions of people's personal devices. They are literally installing surveillance equipment on all devices in the US. They're using something called Neural Match. It's an automated system that would proactively alert a team of human reviewers if it believes that there is illegal imagery on that person's phone. So they could then contact law enforcement. The material can be verified. Now, we've talked a lot about the differences between targeted surveillance and mass surveillance on this show. This is a tool for mass surveillance. The biggest issue with this is that apart from the fact that it's distributing bulk surveillance on, everyone's devices, the system is currently trained to spot child sex abuse, right? But it can be adapted to scan anything at all. There is no way to create a system like this that is only for finding child abuse pictures. So once this is installed, there's no walking this back. This could be trained to do anything, find any kind of dissident, to find people who are pushing back against government, to find people who are human rights workers. I mean, this is a very scary system that would be implemented. It's just, it's very scary because Apple has always been, as I said, this bastion of privacy. And if they go ahead with this, it sort of breaks the dam, and who knows what other stuff will follow after this. Matthew Green said, by the time we find out this was a mistake, it will be way too late. So I'm going to throw this to the group. Adam, I'm going to throw it to you to start off with for your thoughts. I know Snowden had some thoughts, so we can look at those later. But Adam, what do you have to say about this?
Yeah, so I think it's even worse kind of than you've described it. The way that the technology works, the way that machine learning works in general, is that it's making inferences, right, based off of certain pieces of data. But that data doesn't necessarily mean that the thing that they are flagging is a thing that actually is a violation. So there is a more than reasonable chance, and there's some research that was published about this some months ago, about the exact way that they are doing this with the types of hashes, which is basically fingerprints for pieces of images and stuff like that. The other thing that I'll mention is that, one of the things that I think from a privacy perspective has been pretty good so far has been platforms like Signal, WhatsApp, et cetera. You can argue against any particular ones, but the nature of using that type of messaging versus using messaging that uses the traditional SMS system is that the phone company can't be subpoenaed for your chat logs. What this does is it effectively allows the surveillance to exist on your device itself, irrespective of the network that it uses, and it is watching your screen. So it is watching your screen with the idea that it is looking for these images. But as Naomi said, the potential for that to be turned and used for some other purpose, even assuming that it's all good actors out there. Again, all it takes is a hacker to compromise this system, and suddenly it's kind of wide open. So it's a very bad sign. I've never particularly liked Apple, but this is not a good thing, and it makes me very uncomfortable as someone who recently started using an iPhone too. I'm strongly considering moving entirely away from the platform again for another 10 years. Exactly. Yeah. Will, I saw you put your hands up. What are you thinking?
Yeah, so just like the framing of this whole conversation, it's kind of like that rhetoric trick, like when did you stop beating your wife, is always the line, right? It's like, well, I never did. I never did in the first place. But that question frames it like you did at some point do something illegal or something harmful to someone else. Well, look at this tagline right here. Apple plans to scan US iPhones for child abuse images. No one's arguing in favor of child abuse at all. Everyone is against that. But you're implicitly saying that people are doing this and that there needs to be someone in charge of individuals and take control of them, like some sort of nanny state. Obviously, no one is in favor of this. But the downside of interacting with this kind of system and adding machine learning and adding a human component to people's private information is vastly greater. There's just like a huge opportunity for harm going forward from something like this once you implement it. There's a very big slippery slope. I was reading the, I think, economic or gosh, I'm forgetting what the blog's name is, but they're talking about how this system could be used for really just bad actors and how you can kind of change the mechanisms quite easily, kind of what you were talking about, Adam. Right now it's child abuse, but when does it move along, and when do people know that it's moved along to different things, and how is that discretion being used? Like, what are the parameters being used, and when are those parameters changed, and who has the decisions over those parameters? So from top to bottom, pretty frustrating. It also comes after Apple has had this whole privacy campaign for the last 2 years, talking about how they're so privacy focused focused. And then they do an about face like this and start weeding through people's iCloud photos. So pretty frustrating to see this on top of the other news that we've already been seeing today.
Yeah, and I'll just say, sorry, go ahead, Jen.
I'll go very quickly. I just want to draw a comparison. If a private company knocked on your front door and said, we want to search your home for criminal evidence, we have no reason to want to search your home, but we want to come in, you wouldn't let them in. And this is very similar for people who are having a hard time understanding what this actually means. Those photos are your photos that there is absolutely no reason why a private company should be going through them. Something that I thought was really interesting, they said in one of the stories, if you feel like you've been targeted and there's nothing on your phone, there's an appeal process. Well, we've seen with privacy policies that the appeal processes are often very complicated and very hard to find the steps to go through that appeal process. And what happens to your private information when that appeal process is happening? There are so many unanswered questions here, and it's really terrifying.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about that slippery slope. To see Apple descend over the years has been terrible. Snowden tweeted out a great tweet that illustrated this. Apple 2015, we locked the FBI out of a dead terrorist phone to protect your privacy. And then to see this turnaround in 2021, we compare your photo roll in iCloud with a government blacklist and call the cops about it. We also tell mom about your iMessages. That's essentially where we've come from. Apple really was upholding the principles of privacy to the point where they were fighting back against FBI. Now, 2018, they started to turn this back when the FBI pressured them and said, do not encrypt iCloud backups. And they complied. They said, okay, we just won't. We'll still protect your phone, still encrypted, still solid, but iCloud, all right, FBI can have that. Now they're saying, all right, you can no longer have your phone anymore. That's no longer a private space for you. We're also going to have mechanisms for mass surveillance on that. The type of changes that could be implemented to these algorithms. Someone on Hacker News gave a great example. You have the Chinese government saying, "Oh, here's a neural hash for some child abuse imagery. Please scan this user's iPhone and tell us if it's found." And then Apple's like, "Sure, we found it." And all they have this hash they're looking for. Then Chinese government's like, "Oh, this user has unpermitted Winnie the Pooh memes. Send them to an internment camp." There's so much damage that could be caused by these policies, and it's a disaster. There is an open letter to Apple out there if you guys wanted to sign it, just saying that this is a terrible idea, which it absolutely is. Apple was out there normalizing privacy, and now they're just walking that back, and it's leading us to dire straits. But let's move on to something a little more interesting in terms of not being about government doing terrible, terrible things. Adam, let's change track here.
So one of the stories that I've been paying the most attention to is the growing race for legitimacy in US dollar-pegged stablecoins. Stablecoins are used by traders as a way to escape crypto volatility without needing the traditional banking system, and these days are also being used in emerging economies that might otherwise use dollars as a form of savings that can't be devalued by their local government. There have long been concerns about Tether, the original still dominant player, and more specifically how it manages the funds backing the more than $62 billion worth of tokens. Earlier this year, we got a look at the assets that make up its reserves, and many were surprised to find that it had a lot of valuable investments, but few actual dollars. Shortly after, the group behind the second largest stablecoin, USDC, released similar information. And while it looks a lot like a less risky basket than Tether, it's still not just dollars. Well, yesterday we saw a new transparency report from a smaller player, HUSD from Huobi Exchange, that makes up just half a percentage point of the stablecoin market, but who revealed that their dollar-pegged token really does have $1 in a money market account, not an investment worth $1 behind it. Naomi, I am happily at this point thinking that maybe we have a bit of an arms race here. So to you, does a less risky stablecoin move the needle, or is bigger still better when it comes to this sector?
Yeah, I think that competition in stablecoins is awesome. Competition in money is awesome. Competition in private money is awesome. The fact that we have all of these competing firms is fantastic. We talked on the show before about this wildcat era banking when you had these terrible things going on, and George Selgin, monetary historian, kind of shutting that down and being like, actually, those days were great. And when you didn't have the government with their stranglehold on the private sector, you had all kinds of options for people. And it was so good that the government had to tax this private money into oblivion in order to get people to stop using it because people preferred it to the government notes that were issued. I think it's the similar situation here. We're probably going to see big backlash against stablecoins, if we're being honest, with governments taxing these into oblivion and doing whatever they can to get this out of people's minds in terms of options. In terms of like what's risky and what's not risky with stable coins, it's interesting because you are fundamentally always going to have a risk. There is always an issue or risk when you have these centralized entities. And even if they have audits that are quarterly or whatever, that it's very difficult to kind of gauge what's going on behind the scenes at any given time. They may have the funds there at one particular moment. It could be lend out, but then they bring the revenues back. Like, it's just, you always have that issue or risk. But that being said, we have risks in so many of the things we use. And I think we always put money on this pedestal as if it's this thing that should be completely riskless, which is why government should take it over. But unfortunately, when government takes it over, that absolutely does not take away risk. Sometimes it actually adds more risk because monopoly on money just means people don't have any choice in that money. So I think it's very interesting that they're backed 100% by cash held in money market accounts. That's cool because if people show that they value that, then maybe they'll start flocking to services like this. And maybe it does highlight what consumers actually want from their stable coins. Maybe it's not that they need it to be 100% backed at any given time, or maybe there'll be some sort of a bank run and people will realize that, oh, this is actually something that I should value in a money. I just haven't had historical experience with this going wrong before. But very interesting to see this report come out. But Will, I'll throw to you for your thoughts on this.
Just in a general perspective, it makes sense to me that all these stablecoin issuers have a lot of cash in money markets because their money markets are typically extremely liquid and then low yield. And that's literally the point of why they exist, because you want to maybe beat inflation a little bit. But the point is to keep your dollars as dollars going forward. If I put $5 in money market, I want there to be $5 in a money market in 10 years from now. And that's what Tether and USDC and all these other companies want. They want access to these, to this money and to these bank accounts, and they want to earn a little bit of yield on top of that. They wouldn't have an incentive to make a stable coin if they didn't have a yield. Of course, like you can have a front end and charge transaction fees, but nobody's trying to make PayPal. You're trying to make a new financial system, and you have to figure out ways to earn yield on whatever product you're making. I think the more interesting thing to me personally is seeing that there's a lot of competition in the stablecoin space. I think overall in the future, like 5-10 years, there should only be a few winners and losers just because of how money just evolves. Like there's competition between money, and the losers fail hard and they don't exist anymore. But for now, like I'm a huge fan of just seeing as many stable coins hit the market as possible and being as decentralized as possible, whether that's regulatory arbitrage or the asset bases are just all over the place. Maybe we'll see one that's just pure cash and sitting in an offshore bank account. Just with all the regulatory news right now, I'm a huge fan of diversifying among different types of stablecoin models. But Naomi, back to you.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of stablecoin models, you also have completely decentralized ones like the DAI, which is most interesting to me because you don't have that risk factor of a centrally issuing party. And so I love DAI. I think that it's just very interesting. I would like to see more competition in that sphere with more DeFi projects dealing with stablecoins. But just to push back a little bit on the idea that money always converges. Historically, we've had physical money. We've had things we have to carry around, and it's just not feasible to carry around gold and silver and copper and salt and seashells and whatever else, the market determines. So there's a natural force making that converge. We just don't have that when we have digital goods, because you can have infinite number of coins essentially in your wallet, and there's no reason for you to have to, choose between them. These can all be operating under the hood seamlessly, interacting with each other. It could be very liquid. This is something that Scott Stornetta, who was cited 4 out of 8 times in the Satoshi white paper for Bitcoin, this is what he's talked about at length. This idea of this multi-coin economy where all of these things are happening under the hood. We may not even know what we're spending. We might just have algorithms kind of working all that out for us. And so I definitely see a space for lots of competition, the same way that we didn't converge on one toothpaste, the same way we didn't converge on one deodorant. I don't think we're going to converge on one money either. But let's wrap up there and move on to the next topic. Jen, what's going on with FTX? Because I feel like they are just in the news every single day.
Our show is just getting gradually and gradually happier. So I'm happy we can end on just a wonderful, happy note. All right. So FTX has struck yet another deal, this time with Yield Guild Games to sponsor Axie Infinity players. So this sponsorship is a little different than the sponsorships that we've been seeing FTX get involved in. As part of the deal, they're sponsoring 137 Axie Infinity players from developing countries who will receive scholarship funds. And the funds will be for the cost of breeding Axies. So I don't know if any of you guys know about this game. Axies are little like Pokemon-like characters. There they are. They're NFTs. You can buy them or you can create your own. And then you trade these little guys or you participate in battles to earn in-game tokens that you can then trade in for money and make money. And so a really awesome documentary came out just after Consensus 2021 this year that profiled a community in the Philippines, and really young players and really old players were playing this game and making an income that was more than earning minimum wage in the country. So I thought this was a really feel-good story. I think this is a great example of NFTs and crypto being introduced to the people who can benefit from them the most. And so, Adam, I'm going to throw down to you. You are our NFT and gaming guy. What do you take away from this story?
Well, so I mean, just on Axie Infinity generally, I think that as projects go, that one has been getting a lot of attention recently, and for good reason, because it is providing this sort of path towards having kind of work that is also playing at the same time, right? So it's better than local alternatives, and this is something I think that you see with these types of projects, specifically when you're looking at areas of the world that have a lower cost of living and lower wages, right? The thing about these games is that they set economics on a global basis, right? So the economics that someone in the United States or in England is dealing with is the same economics in terms of the value of these things, relatively speaking, as you'd get in some place like the Philippines or someplace else that has, again, a slightly lower cost of living. So what that means is that while in the US, we might want to play this because it's fun, elsewhere, it actually is the equivalent of a job. And that is all part of this non-localized economies thing that we are seeing here. So I think that that's really cool. And I'm personally tracking this game a lot. I have not actually had a chance to try it yet. But again, the news that we've seen over the last 2 weeks has me trying to find time to get some in on Axie. As to the actual story itself, again, I mentioned that these use effectively economics that are not locally oriented. They're kind of globally, whole system wide oriented. So that means that one of the challenges of them is that getting started, if you have to actually buy something, that can be really expensive in local economy terms. So that's what FTX is doing here. They're effectively paying to get people started so they can get past that hump. And again, of the possible uses of apparently the ridiculous amounts of money that FTX is sitting on trying to give out to people in exchange for, cross-promotional opportunities, this feels like one of kind of the better ones and probably one of the cheaper ones for them too.
Yeah, so the setup costs to play the game, I think you need 3 Axies to get started. They start at about $200 a pop. So that's pretty expensive if you're looking at some of the communities that this game is taking off in. You can also loan your Axie to friends and family so that they can earn yield on it, and then you can share the profits. So really interesting models that are being implemented in the game. Naomi, I think you're about to say something and then I cut you off.
Oh, no, you're fine. But I was just going to say that I love crypto for this very reason. I love the fact that we can have these systems that are developed in any country, but there are no barriers to other countries getting involved. And you have seen that there are all these different crypto projects out there that have become a source of revenue for people, whether it's different social media platforms. Like I know that, Hive and Steemit and Memo.cash, Read.cash, these are all places. Library as well is a big one where people are earning money that's actually their livelihood these days by creating content, by using this new crypto ecosystem that's emerged. I mean, earlier in the internet, like you just can't have micropayments, right? Which is why the internet 2.0 developed into this ad-based revenue model. And now that we can have microtransactions because cryptocurrency sort of enabled that, and it's very easy to send like fractions of a penny to someone just for viewing something. As we said, like local economies, that can be worth a whole lot of money to those people. And so the fact that they can now capitalize on this and earn a living from posting content or engaging in these systems is really awesome to see. see, I engage with so many people across the world, in these types of social media crypto forums. And it's so heartening to learn about their stories and about how they are making a living through these things. But let's wrap up there. That is the end of the hash for this week. But join us later on today. We do have All About Bitcoin at 3 p.m. with Christine Lee. And then we're back again on Monday for the hash, 12 o'clock every single day. Have a great week, everyone. And thanks for joining us. Adam, Will, Jen, have a great weekend.
Bye.
Have a good weekend.
Have a good weekend, guys.
See ya.